Listen to a university teacher giving a lecture about emblematic buildings and answer questions 1 to 4.
Right. Today we're going to consider emblematic buildings. That is, buildings which are closely associated with the city where they're situated, and which almost represent the city to the outside world. You know, if you think of Athens, you think of the Acropolis and the Parthenon. Or for Sydney, you think of its opera house. Recently, a lot of other cities around the world have been following the example of Sydney and putting up emblematic buildings. Bilbao, for example, in northern Spain, opened its own Guggenheim Museum in 1999. This houses an important collection of modern art and attracts 1 million visitors to the city every year. In other cities, modern additions to existing buildings have proved a tremendous attraction, as is the case of the glass pyramid in front of the Louvre in Paris, a museum which gets about 5 million visits a year. This is only surpassed by Paris's other emblematic building, the Eiffel Tower, with 6 million. Projects of this type can make a big difference to a city. Let's take the example of Valencia, a city in eastern Spain. Relatively few people used to visit Valencia some years ago. In 1992, it received only 75,000 tourists. However, its city authorities embarked on an extremely ambitious project to create a city of arts and sciences. And when it opened in 2001, its futuristic science museum received no less than 4 million visitors in the first year. The effect of these buildings is tremendous. And even cities in relatively poor countries are doing the same thing. Just look at the new library in Alexandria in Egypt as an example.
Before the lecture continues, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen to the second part of the lecture and answer questions 5 to 10.
These emblematic buildings bring many more visitors to their cities, but that's only one of a number of benefits that arise. In Valencia, the city of arts and sciences breathed new life into a depressed industrial area of the town, and this has now become a prime residential zone as well as a tourist attraction. The effort and vision which goes into completing a project like this also has the effect of enhancing the city's image. Previously, if people thought about Valencia at all, it was seen as a provincial backwater, whereas now it sticks in people's minds. Valencia's progressive and energetic. The City of Arts and Sciences has put Valencia on the international map, and that brings in plenty of new investment from outside, as people realize what excellent business opportunities the city offers. Nowadays, the competition among cities to attract attention from tourists, politicians, and business people is fierce. And in Valencia, they realized that it's not sufficient to have just one emblematic building which will serve for a single short visit. For this reason, they've built an entire complex of buildings. Looking at the next slide, which shows a plan of the City of Arts and Sciences, you'll see what I mean. You park your car in a building which amazingly has a garden with palm trees and sculpture on its roof. You go down some steps, and in front of you, you're faced with the colossal Science Museum, with its huge white arches. This, and the combined planetarium and large-screen film theater nearby are surrounded by artificial lakes, and from a distance they appear to be floating on water. The effect is magical, as the whole complex is built in shining white concrete which reflects in the water. Further along, beyond the planetarium, is the new opera house and theater complex, which from a distance looks like a vast ship. In the opposite direction, they've built the equally breathtaking Oceanographic Park, which is the largest in Europe and features, amongst other things, an underwater restaurant.
Section 2. You are going to hear a news broadcast about proposed developments in a local area and about a local college. First, look at questions 11 to 14. Listen carefully and decide which 4 planned developments are mentioned.
And now for our main headlines on Southern local news for today. First of all, the report relating to the proposed motorway and other developments around the village of Tartlesbury was published this morning. And, as has been expected, it has created quite a lot of interest. The new motorway will pass along the north side of the village, crossing the River Team less than half a kilometre from the well-known beauty spot, Streve Ford, to the northeast of the village. The motorway will cut the village off from the ford, where many children play. But that is not the end of it. There are also plans to build 1,000 houses on farmland west of the village. And on top of that, there are proposals to build an industrial estate for new technology companies on the site of the old steelworks on the edge of the village. A news centre with a swimming pool and a very wide range of sports facilities and a large supermarket with other shops are also planned next to the housing estate.
Before the broadcast continues, look at questions 15 to 20. You will now listen to the second part of the talk. For questions 15 to 18, put a tick in either column A or column B for each of the people mentioned. For questions 19 and 20, decide which of the 4 alternatives is the most suitable answer and circle the correct letter.
Mr. Jones, a local farmer we spoke to early today, is strongly against the plans. But the local council is pushing for them to be adopted in full. They say that new housing is needed in the area and that it is an opportunity to take advantage of government grants for setting up new technology developments. The mayor, Mr. Funn, says, "We must make every effort to do our part for the economy of the country and for the local people. This is a golden opportunity to put Tartlesbury on the map." Reactions to Mr. Funn's comments have been quick to come. Surprisingly, when we contacted the spokesman of the local conservation group, he was very much for the planned developments. But not all the local groups support the scheme. And, unlike the mayor, the local MP, Mrs. Wright, is very much against the planned developments. Mr. Khan, a local shopkeeper, had this to say: "People are absolutely horrified at what is being proposed here. This is just a chance for some people to make money quickly. But I can assure you that if they think that local people are going to be a walkover, they have another think coming. Of course, we welcome the jobs that the new technology park will bring, but we feel that the large increase in housing and the proposed motorway will destroy the character of the area." I think this is a debate that is going to run on for quite some time, and we here on Local News will keep you informed. And now for something quite different. This year's exam results have just come out, and there are a lot of happy faces out there. It would seem that the number of young people going on to university from the local college in Upton, which is not far from Tartlesbury, has increased by 25% this year. All those who have applied to go to university or into teacher training colleges have found places. This is the first time that there has been a 100% success rate at the college. We spoke earlier to the principal of the college, who said she was very proud of all those who had achieved their aims, and she wished them every success in the future. There will be another news bulletin at 11 p.m. And for now, it's back to more music from around the world.
That's the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear a conversation between two students, David and Claire. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Hi, David. How are you going with your history studies?
Very well. I've actually finished it.
That's great! What era did you write on?
I researched Roman London, something I never thought I'd be interested in.
That sounds interesting.
I wanted to tie it into the work I've been doing on engineering, and I found it fascinating and learned many things along the way.
Such as?
Well, although there were prehistoric settlements throughout the vast area now called London, strangely enough, no evidence has yet been found for any such community at the northern end of London Bridge, where the present city grew up.
The origins of London lie in Roman times, right?
Right. When the Romans invaded Britain in 43 AD, they moved north from the Kentish coast and traversed the Thames in the London region, clashing with the local tribesmen just to the north. It has been suggested that the soldiers crossed the river at Lambeth, but it was further downstream that they built a permanent wooden bridge, just east of the present London Bridge, in more settled times some 7 years later. As a focal point of the Roman road system, It was the bridge which attracted settlers and led to London's inevitable growth.
So, London Bridge has been there for hundreds of years?
Yes, and though the regularity of London's original street grid may indicate that the initial inhabitants were the military, trade and commerce soon followed. The London Thames was deep and still within the tidal zone, an ideal place for the berthing of ships.
What other industry did they have?
Well, as the area was also well drained and low-lying, it was geologically suitable for brick-making. There was soon a flourishing city called Londinium in the area where the monument now stands.
Londinium? That's Latin.
That's what I thought too, but the name itself is Celtic, not Latin, and may originally have referred merely to a previous farmstead on the site.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 32. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 32.
Wasn't London burned to the ground at some stage?
It happened in AD 60 by the forces of Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe from modern Norfolk, when she led a major revolt against Roman rule. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, who was busy exterminating the Druids in North Wales, marched his troops south in an attempt to save London, but, seeing the size of Boudica's approaching army, decided he could not mount an adequate defence and evacuated the city instead. Not everyone managed to escape, though, and many were massacred.
What about the beautiful old architecture? Did you research that too?
I sure did. The major symbol of Roman rule was the temple of the imperial cult. Emperor worship was administered by the provincial council, whose headquarters appear to have been in London by AD 100. A member of its staff, named Anancletus, buried his wife on Ludgate Hill around this time. Pagan worship flourished within the cosmopolitan city. A temple to the mysterious Eastern god Mithras was found at Bucklersbury House and is displayed nearby.
I quite like St. Paul's.
Traditionally, St. Paul's Cathedral stands on the site of a temple of Diana. Other significant buildings also began to appear in the late 1st century, at a time when the city was expanding rapidly. The Forum, a marketplace and basilica which housed the Law Courts complex at Leadenhall Market, was erected and then quickly replanned as the largest such complex north of the Alps. The Forum was much bigger than today's Trafalgar Square.
Who was in charge of all the town planning at the time?
Procurator Agricola. He encouraged the use of bathhouses and had a grand public suite made, which is now being excavated in Upper Thames Street. They were as much a social venue as a place to bathe. There was a smaller version at Cheapside, and in later centuries, private bathhouses were also built. Another popular attraction was the wooden amphitheatre, erected on the northwestern outskirts of the city. It's possible that gladiatorial shows were put on here, though lesser public sports, like bear baiting, may have been more regular.
I thought that happened mainly in the Colosseum in Rome, but I guess London being settled by the Romans explains their lust for blood.
By about AD 200, the administration of Britain was divided in two. York became the capital of Britannia Inferior and London of Britannia Superior. Around the same time, the city also acquired its famous walls, probably about 20 foot high.
Why did they build such high walls?
It was a protective measure which may have been due to civil war, initiated when Governor Claudius Albinus tried to claim the imperial crown in Rome.
Was paganism still predominant then?
Yes, but Christianity appears to have reached the province at an early date. And only a year after the religion became officially tolerated in the empire, London had its own bishop, Restitutus, who is known to have attended the Imperial Council of Arles.
You really delve deep. I think you'll do well on your tutorial paper. Good luck, David.
Thanks.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Test 1. Listening. Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture about a place called Cuba Pedy. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 36.
Good afternoon. Today, we're continuing this series of talks on the development of the Australian outback with a look at Cuba Pedy, the desert town of opal mines and underground living, which lies 860 kilometres north of Adelaide and 690 south of Alice Springs. The inaccessibility, harsh climate and almost total lack of water made it a highly unlikely place for human habitation. But that all started to change in 1915 with the discovery there of opals, the precious stones which seem to change colour according to their surroundings. Settlements were established following the First World War, when soldiers returning from the trenches of France brought with them the techniques of living below ground in dugouts. The Depression of the 1920s and 30s led to many prospectors leaving, but the town boomed again in the late 1940s when shallow new opal fields were discovered, and immigrants from Europe arrived in large numbers after the Second World War. It must be remembered, though, just how hostile conditions were. Daytime summer temperatures reached well over 50 degrees centigrade, winter nights were bitterly cold, and dense dust storms regularly blanketed the town. To cope with this, more and more people began living in disused mines and purpose-built subterranean houses, where the temperature remains at a comfortable 25 degrees all year round, so that eventually around 70% of the town's inhabitants had made their homes beneath the surface. This led to the construction of hotels and even churches below ground, as well as an entire underground shopping centre, the only one in the world.
Test 1. Listening. Section 4. Now answer questions 37 to 40.
Perhaps not surprisingly, this has now led to the emergence of a secondary industry, tourism. Increasing numbers of visitors come to see the tunnels and the caves with their ventilation shafts, the weird machines lying about in the town, and, just beyond it in the scorched red desert, the conical hills thrown up by the world's biggest opal mines. It's a logical stopping place for travellers too. The nearest town to Cuba Pedy is Woomera, in the prohibited area once used for launching space rockets. But even that is an enormous distance away. Within the town itself, there are plenty of hotel rooms and a number of ethnic restaurants. Remember that Cuba Pedy is one of the most multicultural places in Australia, with an estimated 45 nationalities represented, and its very own Opal Museum. A short distance from town, there's a section of the enormous barrier that runs thousands of kilometres across the country, the Dingo Fence, which is meant to keep these predatory wild dogs out of the sheep farming areas. Another attraction just outside town are the sets of various films made there, including Mad Max 3, as well as The Red Planet and Until the End of the World. Names that reflect the harshness of the terrain and temperatures there. The name Coober Pedy, incidentally, comes from an Aboriginal expression meaning white man's hole in the ground. Next, I'd like to go on to talk about Broken Hill, another mining town, but one that...
That is the end of Test 1.